Chapter 1. The Man with the Schedule. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., but Kirt Preston was already awake. He always was. Sleep had become more of a suggestion than a necessity these days. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of his refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside his apartment window. Another day, another mountain of deadlines. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, rubbed his face, and muttered, "Let's do this." It wasn't enthusiasm, it was habit. Coffee first, then emails, then the endless parade of client calls that made up his life. By 6:15, his laptop was open on the kitchen counter, and his inbox looked like a crime scene. 47 unread messages, 3 flagged as urgent, and 1 marked, need by end of day, from yesterday. Kirt sighed, took a sip of coffee, and started typing. His fingers moved fast, efficient, like a man who had learned the art of survival through sheer necessity. He wasn't a workaholic. He hated that word. He worked because he had to, because 4 years ago, his life had imploded in spectacular fashion. The divorce had been brutal. Not emotionally. He'd handled that part with quiet dignity. But financially? It was like being mugged by the legal system in broad daylight. He's student loans, credit card debt, and a few bills he didn't even know existed had landed squarely on his shoulders. He'd gone from a promising career trajectory to near bankruptcy in 4 months. For months, that was all it took to dismantle everything he'd built since college. He still remembered her words the day she asked for the divorce. "We've grown into different people, Kirt. It's just the natural evolution of marriage." Natural evolution. Like it was biology, not betrayal. He shook the memory off and focused on the spreadsheet glowing on his screen. Numbers didn't lie. People did. By noon, Kirt had powered through 3 client proposals, 2 budget revisions, and a call that ran 30 minutes over because someone didn't understand the concept of final draft. He leaned back in his chair, stretched his arms, and checked his phone. A text from his mom blinked at him. "Mom, dinner tonight? 7 p.m. Just us. Promise." Kirt frowned. His mom was sweet, but she had a habit of ambushing him with family gatherings disguised as just us. He typed back, "Kirt, sure. Just us, right?" 3 dots danced on the screen before her reply came. "Mom." Of course, he didn't trust that smiley face. Not one bit. At 6:45, Kirt pulled into his parents' driveway. The house looked the same as it always had. White siding, blue shutters, and a porch swing that creaked when the wind blew. He parked, grabbed the bottle of wine he'd picked up on the way, and headed inside. "Mom? Dad?" he called, stepping into the warm glow of the living room. His mom appeared, all smiles and hugs. "Kirt, you look so thin. Are you eating?" "Define eating," he said dryly, handing her the wine. She swatted his arm. "You work too much." "Occupational hazard," he replied, scanning the room. No sign of extended family. Maybe she was telling the truth this time. Dinner smelled amazing. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Comfort food. He followed her into the dining room, and that's when he saw her. Eve, sitting at the table like she belonged there. Like the last 4 years hadn't happened. Kirt froze in the doorway. His mom's voice floated behind him, cheerful and oblivious. "Look who stopped by. Isn't this nice?" "Nice. Sure." If by nice she meant catastrophic. Eve stood, her smile tentative. "Hi, Kirt." He stared at her for a long moment, then said, "Hi." His tone was neutral, but inside, something twisted. She looked the same. Same chestnut hair, same green eyes, but softer somehow. Less polished. Like life had knocked her around too. "Surprise," his mom said, as if this were a birthday party and not an emotional landmine. "We thought it'd be good to catch up." "We?" Kirt asked, his voice calm but edged. His dad cleared his throat. "Your mom thought, right?" Kirt said, cutting him off. He walked to the table, set the wine down, and took a seat across from Eve. If they wanted a show, he'd give them one. A polite one. Dinner started awkwardly. His mom tried small talk. His dad asked about work. Eve stayed quiet, pushing green beans around her plate like they held the secrets of the universe. Finally, his mom said, "You two were so good together." "Maybe, Mom," Kirt said, his voice steady. "Stop." She blinked. Stop," he repeated, then turned to Eve. "You want to know what happened after the divorce?" Eve's eyes widened. "Kirt, you don't have to." "No, I think I do." He leaned forward, his tone calm, almost conversational. "I was on the brink of bankruptcy. Did you know that? I paid off your student loans, your credit cards, bills I didn't even know existed. For months, Eve. That's all it took to wipe out everything I'd worked for." The room went silent. His mom's fork hovered midair. His dad stared at his plate. Eve's face drained of color. "I didn't," she started. "Of course you didn't," Kirt said, his voice still calm. "Because I never told you. I never yelled. Never made you feel guilty. You wanted out, so I let you go. But don't sit here and pretend like we're old friends catching up. You destroyed my life, Eve. And I rebuilt it. Alone." He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked to the door. Eve's voice followed him, soft and trembling. "Kirt, I'm sorry." He didn't stop. Didn't look back. "Good night," he said, and left. Outside, the cold air hit him like a slap. He took a deep breath, stared at the dark sky, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not happiness. Not closure. Just the weight of silence after a storm. He got in his car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving the past and the dinner table behind. Chapter 2. The Dinner Ambush Fallout. Kirt drove aimlessly for 20 minutes after leaving his parents' house, the bottle of wine still sitting unopened on the passenger seat like a silent accusation. He didn't even know where he was going, just away. Away from the dining room that smelled like roast chicken and betrayal. Away from Eve's wide eyes and his mother's hopeful smile. Finally, he pulled into a quiet park, the kind with a single bench under a flickering street lamp and a playground that looked abandoned after dark. He killed the engine and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing. He wasn't angry. That was the strange part. He thought he'd feel rage, betrayal, something sharp enough to cut through the numbness. Instead, he felt hollow, like he'd just emptied a box he'd been carrying for years and didn't know what to do with the space left behind. His phone buzzed. Mom. Mom. Kirt, please come back. We didn't mean. He turned the screen face down on the passenger seat. Not tonight. He couldn't handle her well-meaning optimism or his dad's awkward silence. And Eve? He didn't even want to think about her right now. By the time he got home, it was nearly midnight. He tossed his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and poured himself a glass of whiskey. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. He stared at the amber liquid, wondering if it could burn away the memory of Eve's voice saying, "I'm sorry." He downed the drink in one swallow and set the glass aside. Sleep wasn't coming tonight. He opened his laptop instead, because work was safe. Work didn't ambush him with ghosts from the past. The next morning, Kirt was back at his desk by 6. Emails, spreadsheets, conference calls, his armor against chaos. He buried himself in numbers until his phone buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen made his stomach tighten. Eve Bradford. He stared at the notification, thumb hovering over the screen. She hadn't texted him in months. Maybe years. He considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. Eve, can we talk? Just once. Please. Kirt exhaled slowly, then typed back. Kirt, about what? Her reply came fast. Eve, last night. Everything. I didn't know, Kirt. I swear I didn't. He stared at the words, jaw tightening. Of course she didn't know. He'd made sure of that. He'd kept his pain locked up because what was the point of sharing it? She wanted out. He gave her out. End of story. Except now, apparently, it wasn't. By evening, he was home again, nursing another glass of whiskey when the knock came. 3 sharp raps on his apartment door. He didn't need to check the peephole. He knew. He opened the door to find Eve standing there, clutching her coat like it was armor. Her hair was damp from the rain, and her eyes, those green eyes he used to know so well, looked uncertain. Kirt, she said softly. Can I come in? He considered saying no. He really did. But something in her voice, fragile, almost pleading, made him step aside. 5 minutes, he said. She slipped inside, her heels clicking on the hardwood. The apartment was neat, almost sterile. No photos, no clutter. Just a man's life stripped down to essentials. You've changed, she said, glancing around. So have you. He replied, motioning to the couch. Sit. She did, perching on the edge like she might bolt at any second. He stayed standing, arms crossed. Say what you came to say, he said. Eve swallowed hard. I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving. For not understanding what you were going through. Kirt's laugh was short, humorless. You didn't understand because I didn't tell you. I know, she said quickly. But last night, hearing what happened. Kirt, I had no idea. I thought you were fine. Fine. He shook his head. I was drowning, Eve. And you were already gone. Her eyes shimmered. I thought you didn't care. You worked so much, it felt like living alone. I told you from the start what my schedule was, he said evenly. You said you could handle it. I thought I could, she whispered. I was wrong. Silence stretched between them, heavy and awkward. Rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. Finally, Kirt said, why are you here? Eve's voice cracked. Because I miss you. Because I still. She stopped, biting her lip. I just wanted to see if there's any chance. Kirt stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he said, quietly but firmly, no. Her breath hitched. Just like that. Just like that, he said. I'm not angry, Eve. I don't hate you. But I'm not going back. Ever. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. I guess I deserved that. He didn't answer. He just opened the door and waited. After a long moment, she stood, walked past him, and stepped into the rain. Kirt, she said softly, turning back one last time. You were the best thing in my life. I'm sorry I didn't see it then. He met her gaze, calm and steady. Goodbye, Eve. And then she was gone. Kirt closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The apartment was silent again, but his mind wasn't. Her words lingered, echoing in the quiet. Any chance? No, not now. Not ever. Chapter 3. Eve's regret. Eve Bradford sat in her car outside Kirt's apartment building, clutching the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing in her life. Rain streaked down the windshield, blurring the city lights into smudges of gold and gray. She whispered to herself, well, that went great. It hadn't. It had gone catastrophically bad. She'd walked into his apartment hoping for a conversation, maybe a flicker of warmth, and instead got a door slammed on the last shred of hope she'd been nursing for months. She started the engine, drove home in silence, and collapsed onto her couch. Her apartment was smaller than the one she'd shared with Kirt, and emptier too. No laughter, no quiet hum of his late-night work sessions, no smell of coffee at dawn. Just her and the echo of choices she couldn't undo. She pulled out her phone and opened Google. Her search history was already embarrassing. How to win back your ex without looking desperate. Signs he still loves you. Can you fix a divorce? Tonight, she added a new one. How to apologize without sounding pathetic. The results were useless. One article suggested baking cookies. Another recommended writing a heartfelt letter. Eve snorted. Yeah, because nothing says, I ruined your life, like chocolate chip. She tossed the phone aside and stared at the ceiling. The truth was, she had loved Kirt. Still did. She'd left because she felt invisible, because his work consumed him, because she thought freedom would feel like oxygen. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with no one to catch her. She remembered the night she told him she wanted out. He didn't yell, didn't beg, just nodded, calm as ever, and said, if that's what you need. That quiet acceptance had haunted her more than any fight could have. The next morning, Eve sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a notebook. If Google couldn't help her, she'd make her own plan. She wrote at the top of the page, Operation, fix everything. Step 1, apologize properly. Step 2, show him I've changed. Step 3, don't look like a stalker. She stared at step 3 for a long time. Too late, she muttered, remembering last night's rain-soaked doorstep moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend, Marcy. Marcy? So, how'd it go with Mr. Tall, dark, and emotionally guarded? Eve groaned and typed back. Eve. He said no. Just like that. Marcy, ouch. Did you cry? Eve. Not in front of him. Marcy, progress. So what now? Eve stared at the question, then typed. Eve. I don't know. But I'm not giving up yet. Marcy's reply came with a gif of a woman in armor riding a horse into battle. Marcy. Go get him, warrior queen. Eve laughed despite herself. Leave it to Marcy to turn heartbreak into a pep talk. By noon, Eve was back on Google, this time searching for something less pathetic. How to reconnect without pressure. Ways to show someone you've changed. She scribbled ideas in her notebook. Casual coffee invite? Funny text? Mutual friends? Then she circled the last one. Mutual friends. That could work. If she showed up somewhere Kirt already planned to be, it wouldn't look like stalking. It would look coincidental. Sort of. She smiled, feeling the first spark of determination since last night. She wasn't naive. She knew this wouldn't be easy. Kirt wasn't the type to forgive quickly, and he definitely wasn't the type to forget. But she also knew something else. She'd walked away from the best thing in her life, and she wasn't about to let pride keep her from trying to make it right. Even if it meant Googling how to casually bump into your ex without looking creepy. That evening, Eve sat on her couch with Marcy on speakerphone, hashing out the details of her totally not stalking plan. So let me get this straight, Marcy said. You're going to show up at a networking mixer because you think he might be there? Not think, Eve corrected. No, he goes to those things all the time. And if he's not there, then I drink wine and pretend I'm networking, Eve said, pacing the living room. Worst case, I make a new LinkedIn connection. Marcy snorted. Best case, you run into him and what? Fall into his arms like a rom-com heroine. No, Eve said quickly. I just talked to him. Show him I'm not the same person who walked away. Marcy was quiet for a beat, then said, Eve, I love you, but this sounds like a bad idea. Maybe, Eve admitted. But doing nothing feels worse. Later that night, Eve lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Kirt's face when he said no. Calm, steady, final. She thought about the way his voice didn't waver, even when she told him she still loved him. And she thought about what she'd do if she saw him again. No begging, no tears, just honesty. And maybe a joke, because humor was her armor. She smiled faintly, whispering to the dark, round 2, Kirt. Ready or not? Chapter 4. The unwanted drop-in. Kirt had just finished his third client call of the day and was debating whether dinner would be actual food or something that came in a foil wrapper when the knock came. 3 quick raps on his apartment door. He froze mid-step toward the kitchen. Nobody knocked on his door. Delivery guys rang the bell. Neighbors texted first. This was unexpected. He opened the door, and there she was. Eve. Again. Her hair was dry this time, pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore jeans and a soft gray sweater, casual but deliberate. Her expression was a mix of determination and nerves, like someone about to jump into cold water. Kirt, she said, her voice steady. Can we talk? He stared at her for a long beat, then leaned against the doorframe. We did that last night. I know, she said quickly. But I didn't say everything I wanted to. That's because I didn't want to hear it. He replied, calm but firm. Her jaw tightened. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Kirt considered slamming the door. He really did. But something in her eyes, raw, unguarded, made him sigh and step aside. Fine, he said. 5 minutes. She walked in, glancing around like she was cataloging the changes since she'd last been here. The apartment was still minimalist, still quiet, still very much him. No photos, no clutter, just clean lines and muted colors. You've made it nice, she said, trying for casual. Thanks, he said flatly, motioning to the couch. Sit. She did, perching on the edge like last time. He stayed standing, arms crossed. So, he said, what's left to say? Eve took a breath. I know I hurt you. I know I walked away when you needed me most. And I'm sorry, Kirt. Truly. He nodded slowly. You said that yesterday. I know, she said, her voice cracking. But I need you to understand. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. Kirt's laugh was short, sharp. You left because you felt neglected. Her eyes shimmered. Yes, and I was wrong. I thought freedom would make me happy. It didn't. It just made me realize what I lost. He stared at her, expression unreadable. And now what? You want to pick up where we left off? Pretend the last 4 years didn't happen. No, she said quickly. I want a chance to make things right. Kirt shook his head. Eve, I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not going back. Ever. Her breath hitched. Because of what happened? Because of the money? Because of everything, he said evenly. Because I rebuilt my life without you. Because I learned something the hard way. I can't afford chaos. Her brow furrowed. Chaos? Is that what you think I am? He met her gaze, calm and steady. You were. And I'm not gambling my future on anyone again. Silence stretched, heavy and brittle. Finally, Eve whispered, so that's it. That's it, he said. She stood slowly, her hands trembling. Okay, she said softly. I guess I deserve that. He opened the door, waiting. She walked past him, paused in the doorway, and turned back. For what it's worth, she said, her voice barely audible. I still love you. Kirt didn't flinch, didn't soften. Goodbye, Eve. And then she was gone. He closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled. His phone buzzed on the counter, a client email, urgent as always. He stared at it for a moment, then laughed under his breath. Chaos, he muttered. Always chaos. He walked to the couch and sat down heavily, elbows on his knees, staring at the blank wall across from him. The apartment felt smaller now, like her presence had left an imprint he couldn't scrub away. Why did she keep coming back? Why now? He'd given her what she wanted, a clean break, no drama, no guilt trips. He'd swallowed the financial disaster, rebuilt his life from the ground up, and never once asked her for anything. And now she wanted what? Redemption? Closure? A second chance? Kirt rubbed his temples, frustration simmering beneath the calm exterior. He wasn't angry at her, not anymore. He was angry at the system that had gutted him, at the naive version of himself who believed marriage was a safe bet. He'd learned the hard way that love wasn't just an emotion. It was a contract, and contracts could ruin you. He stood, pacing the room. His rules weren't arbitrary. They were survival. No legal ties. No shared accounts. No illusions about forever. He'd built a fortress around his life, and he wasn't about to let anyone tear it down, not even Eve. Especially not Eve. Chapter 5. Enter the curveball. Kirt hated coffee shops. They were loud, crowded, and full of people who thought Wi-Fi was a personality trait. But his client insisted on meeting at one, and when you're clawing your way back from financial ruin, you don't argue about venue choices. He pushed open the glass door of Bean and Theory, scanning for a quiet corner. No luck. The place buzzed like a beehive, baristas shouting orders, laptops glowing, conversations overlapping like bad jazz. He spotted his client near the back, waved, and made his way over. The meeting was quick. Numbers, timelines, polite nods. By the time they wrapped up, Kirt was ready to escape. He grabbed his laptop bag and turned toward the door. That's when he heard it. Excuse me, a voice said, warm and teasing. Are you always this serious? Or is today special? Kirt stopped, turned, and found himself looking at a woman leaning against the counter, holding a cup of something topped with whipped cream and confidence. She had dark curls pulled into a messy bun, a leather jacket over a bright yellow dress, and eyes that sparkled like she knew 10 jokes he'd never hear. He blinked. Sorry, she grinned. You've been frowning at your laptop for an hour. I was starting to worry it owed you money. Kirt's lips twitched. It does, actually. In a way. Ah, she said, sipping her drink. A man with financial grudges. Sexy. He stared at her, unsure if she was joking. She was, obviously, but the ease in her tone threw him off balance. I'm Lila, she said, sticking out a hand like they were old friends. And you are? Kirt, he said, shaking her hand. Firm grip, quick release. He wasn't in the mood for small talk, but something about her energy made it hard to walk away. Well, Kirt, she said, tilting her head. You look like someone who needs a break. Ever tried smiling in public? It's wild. He chuckled despite himself. I'll take your word for it. Suit yourself, she said, shrugging. But if you keep glaring at spreadsheets like that, people are going to start a GoFundMe for your happiness. Kirt shook his head, amused and annoyed in equal measure. Do you always talk to strangers like this? Only the ones who look like they're auditioning for a documentary called Men Who Forgot How to Have Fun, she said, eyes dancing. He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. It startled him, and maybe her too, because her smile softened. There it is, she said. Proof you're human. Kirt glanced at the door, then back at her. He should leave. He had work, deadlines, a life built on structure and control. But instead, he heard himself say, what are you drinking? Caramel chaos, she said with a grin. Want one? Chaos, he repeated, the word tasting strange on his tongue. Not my thing. Maybe it should be, she said, and winked. 10 minutes later, Kirt was sitting across from Lila with a cup of caramel chaos in his hand, wondering how the hell this happened. She talked easily, about books, music, the absurdity of pumpkin spice season, and he found himself listening, really listening, instead of mentally drafting emails. So, she said, stirring her drink. What's your deal? You look like a man with rules. I have boundaries, he said. Boundaries, she echoed. Sounds clinical. It's practical, he said. I don't do drama. I don't do games. And I definitely don't do chaos. She smiled slowly. Good thing I'm not chaos. I'm unpredictability. He raised a brow. That's worse. Depends on your perspective, she said, leaning in. Sometimes unpredictability is the best part. Kirt didn't answer. He just sipped his drink, the caramel sweetness clashing with his usual black coffee routine. And for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, his rules weren't as ironclad as he thought. As they talked, Kirt felt something he hadn't felt in years, a spark. Not the reckless kind that burned fast and left scars, but something quieter, steadier. Lila wasn't pushing. She wasn't asking for anything. She was just there, laughing, teasing, making him forget for 5 minutes that his life was a fortress built on fear. He hated that it felt good. He hated that he wanted more. When they finally stood to leave, Lila smiled and said, "Same time tomorrow?" Kirt blinked. "Tomorrow." "Relax," she said, laughing. "I'm kidding. Mostly. But hey, if you ever want to trade spreadsheets for conversation, you know where to find me." She walked out, curls bouncing, leaving Kirt staring after her like a man who'd just been handed a puzzle with no instructions. Chapter 6. Eve's plan backfires. Eve had a plan. It wasn't perfect. Actually, it was barely a plan, but it was something. Mutual friends, casual setting, no pressure. That was the idea. So when Marcy mentioned a networking mixer at Bean in theory, Eve jumped at the chance. Kirt liked coffee shops, right? He practically lived in them for work. If he showed up, it would look like coincidence. Totally innocent. Except when Eve walked in, the first thing she saw was Kirt. And the second thing she saw was Kirt laughing. With another woman. Eve froze near the door, her pulse spiking. Kirt didn't laugh. Not like that. Not the easy, unguarded kind that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. She hadn't seen that laugh in years, and now it was aimed at someone else. The woman was striking in a way that made Eve's stomach twist. Dark curls, bright yellow dress, leather jacket. Confident. Effortless. She leaned across the table, grinning like she owned the room. And Kirt looked like he didn't mind. Eve swallowed hard and forced herself to move toward the counter. Coffee first. Then maybe she'd figure out how to breathe again. Lila noticed Eve before Kirt did. She clocked the stiff posture, the too bright smile, the way her eyes flicked toward their table like a compass needle stuck on north. "Interesting. Friend of yours?" Lila asked lightly, nodding toward the counter. Kirt glanced over and froze. His jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened, and for a second, Lila thought he might actually bolt. "Ex-wife," he said flatly. "Oh," Lila said, eyebrows lifting. "That explains the murder glare." Kirt shot her a look. "It's not a glare. It's definitely a glare," Lila said, amused. "Want me to throw my drink at her? Create a distraction?" Kirt almost smiled. "Almost. Please don't." "Fine," Lila said, sipping her caramel chaos. "But if she comes over here, I'm charging admission." Eve paid for her coffee and turned, heart pounding. She could leave. She should leave. But her feet betrayed her, carrying her straight to Kurt's table like they had a death wish. "Kirt," she said, forcing a smile. "Hi." Kirt looked up, calm as ever. "Eve." Lila glanced between them, her grin widening. "Well, this just got interesting." Eve blinked at her. "And you are?" "Lila," she said brightly, offering a hand. "Friend. Coffee enthusiast. Occasional chaos agent." Eve hesitated, then shook her hand. "Nice to meet you." "Likewise," Lila said, eyes sparkling. "So, you two know each other?" Kurt's tone was clipped. "We used to be married." "Oh," Lila said, feigning surprise. "That explains the tension. And here I thought you were just brooding for fun." Kirt shot her a look that said stop talking, but Lila ignored it. Sipping her drink like this was the best entertainment she'd had all week. Eve cleared her throat. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say hi." "Hi," Kirt said again, voice neutral. Silence stretched, awkward and heavy. Lila broke it with a cheerful, "So, Eve, what's your drink? Please tell me it's something dramatic, like triple shot redemption latte." Eve blinked. "A caramel macchiato." "Close enough," Lila said, grinning. Sweet with a hint of guilt. Kirt groaned softly. "Lila." "What?" she said innocently. "I'm just making conversation." Eve's cheeks flushed. "I should let you two get back to your coffee." "Probably a good idea," Kirt said, his tone polite but firm. Eve nodded, her throat tight. "It was good to see you." Kirt didn't answer. Lila did. "You too. Swing by any time. We love plot twists." Eve managed a strained smile and walked out, her coffee clutched like a lifeline. Outside, the rain had stopped, but she felt soaked anyway, drenched in humiliation and regret. Back at the table, Lila watched her go, then turned to Kirt with a mischievous smile. "So that was fun." Kirt rubbed his temples. "Define fun." "Watching you squirm?" "Absolutely," Lila said. "But hey, points for honesty. Most guys would have lied." "I don't lie," Kirt said simply. "I'm starting to notice that," Lila said, leaning in. "It's weirdly attractive." Kirt stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or run. And for the first time in years, he realized something unsettling. His life was no longer predictable. Eve sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. She'd planned for awkward. She hadn't planned for competition. Who was Lila? Why was Kirt laughing with her like that? Eve had spent years convincing herself that Kirt didn't know how to relax, that his work consumed every ounce of joy he had left. And now he was smiling like he'd rediscovered oxygen. Her phone buzzed. "Marcy. Marcy, well? Did you talk to him?" Eve stared at the screen, then typed. "Eve, I saw him. With someone else." Three dots danced. Then, Marcy. Ouch. Abort mission? Eve closed her eyes, heart aching. She didn't know the answer. Chapter 7. Mixed signals. Lila tossed her leather jacket onto the couch and flopped down beside her best friend, Tessa, who was already armed with wine and curiosity. Spill. Tessa said, handing Lila a glass. You've been grinning like a cat with a secret since you texted me. Lila smirked. Met someone. Tessa's eyebrows shot up. Someone as in someone? Someone as in tall, broody, and allergic to fun, Lila said, kicking off her boots. Name's Kirt. Tessa laughed. Allergic to fun? Sounds like my last accountant. Pretty close, Lila said, sipping her wine. He's got this whole, I don't do drama, I don't do games vibe. Like he's running a dating app for robots. And you like that? Tessa asked, incredulous. I don't know, Lila admitted, twirling her glass. It's refreshing. No fake charm, no mystery texts. Just straight up honesty. He told me he doesn't do chaos, Tessa snorted. Then why is he talking to you? Rude, Lila said, laughing. But fair. So what's the catch? Tessa asked. Guys like that always have one. Oh, he has one, Lila said, leaning back. Ex-wife. Tessa's eyes widened. Oh, complicated. Understatement, Lila said. She showed up at the coffee shop today. Total soap opera moment. Did you throw your drink at her? Tessa asked hopefully. Tempting, Lila said with a grin. But no, I just watched. And teased him a little. Tessa grinned. You're evil. Maybe, Lila said, shrugging. But here's the thing, he didn't lie. He didn't pretend she was nobody. He just said, we used to be married. Like it was a fact, not a scandal. Tessa tilted her head. So you like him? Lila hesitated. I like talking to him. He's steady. Like a tree. A tree? Tessa laughed. Romantic. You know what I mean, Lila said, rolling her eyes. He's grounded. Solid. And after the parade of guys who think commitment is a four-letter word, that feels nice. But, Tessa prompted. But, Lila said, sighing, he's got walls. Big ones. Like, Great Wall of China big. Challenge accepted? Tessa teased. Lila smiled slowly. Maybe. I'm not looking for a ring. Just curious. Careful, Tessa warned. Curiosity killed the cat. Yeah, Lila said, finishing her wine. But satisfaction brought it back. Later that night, Lila lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Kirt's laugh, the one that slipped out before he could stop it. She thought about the way his eyes softened when he wasn't guarding them. And she thought about his words. I don't do chaos. She smiled to herself. Guess we'll see about that. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tessa. Tessa, so what's the plan, chaos agent? Lila, no plan. Just coffee. And maybe dessert. Tessa, dessert as in cheesecake or dessert as in dessert? Lila, cheesecake. For now. Tessa, for now. Got it. Wear the yellow dress again. It's lethal. Lila laughed, tossing the phone aside. She wasn't sure what this was yet. A spark, a distraction, or something more. But she knew one thing. Kirt Preston was interesting. And she hadn't felt this kind of curiosity in a long time. Chapter 8. The honest date. Kirt wasn't sure why he agreed to this. Dinner. With Lila. At an actual restaurant instead of a coffee shop where he could hide behind his laptop. It felt risky. Not in the legal sense. He'd sworn off that kind of risk forever. But in the emotional sense. The kind that made his chest feel tight and his thoughts run in circles. He arrived 10 minutes early. Because punctuality was his armor. The restaurant was cozy, dimly lit, with soft jazz playing in the background. He chose a table near the window, ordered water, and checked his phone twice before she walked in. And when she did, the room shifted. Lila wore a deep green dress that made her eyes look like trouble. Her curls framed her face in a way that seemed effortless, and her smile, bright, unapologetic, hit him like sunlight after a storm. You're early, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. I'm always early, he replied. Of course you are, she said, grinning. You look like the kind of guy who schedules his spontaneity. Kirt smirked. Spontaneity is overrated. Spoken like a man who's never tried karaoke at midnight, she teased, picking up the menu. He raised a brow. You do that? Only on Thursdays, she said, deadpan. Then she laughed at his expression. Relax, Preston. I'm kidding. He shook his head, amused despite himself. You're unpredictable. Thank you, she said, like it was a compliment. So what's good here? I wouldn't know, he admitted. I don't eat out much. Of course you don't, she said, eyes twinkling. Let me guess, too busy working? He didn't flinch. Yes. She set the menu down and leaned in, her tone softening. You really don't do games, do you? No, he said simply. I don't have time for them. Interesting, she murmured. Most guys say that, but they mean, I'll play games until I get bored. You actually mean it. I told you, he said, meeting her gaze. I have boundaries. Boundaries, she repeated, tasting the word. Sounds clinical. It's practical, he said. I don't do drama. I don't do chaos. And I definitely don't do legal entanglements. Her brows lifted. Legal entanglements. Marriage, he said bluntly. Lila blinked, then laughed. A warm, surprised sound that made heads turn. Wow. Straight to the point. I told you, he said. No games. She studied him for a moment, her smile fading into something thoughtful. You really got burned, didn't you? He didn't answer right away. He just looked out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Let's just say I learned the hard way that love and law don't mix. Lila nodded slowly. Fair enough. But just so you know, I'm not asking for a ring. He glanced at her, and for the first time that night, his guard slipped. Then what are you asking for? She smiled, slow and sure. Dinner. Conversation. Maybe dessert if you behave. Kirt laughed, really laughed, and it startled him. It felt good. Dangerous, but good. Dessert, he said, shaking his head. That's chaos. Sweet chaos, she corrected, raising her glass. To unpredictability. He hesitated, then lifted his own glass. To boundaries. Their glasses clinked, and for the first time in years, Kirt wondered if maybe, just maybe, he could bend a rule or two. Dinner was easy in a way Kirt didn't expect. Lila teased him about his spreadsheet addiction, and he countered with dry humor that made her laugh so hard she nearly spilled her wine. They talked about books, music, and why pineapple on pizza was a crime against humanity. For a man who lived by structure, Kirt found himself enjoying the unpredictability of her conversation. Halfway through dessert, cheesecake, because Lila insisted, she leaned back and said, "So, Mr. Boundaries, what's the worst thing you've ever done?" Kirt raised a brow. "Define worst." "Something reckless," she said. "Something that made you feel alive." He thought for a moment, then said, "I once bought a motorcycle." Her eyes widened. "Seriously?" He nodded. "Rode it twice. Sold it after realizing I like my bones intact." Lila laughed, shaking her head. "Wow, living on the edge." "What about you?" he asked. "Worst thing you've ever done?" She grinned. "Karaoke at midnight. In a wedding dress." Kirt blinked. "Why?" "Long story," she said, sipping her wine. "But it involved tequila and a dare." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're chaos. And you like it," she said, smiling. He didn't deny it. As they walked out into the cool night air, Kirt felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Not the naive kind that believed in forever, but something smaller, quieter. A possibility. Lila wasn't asking for everything. She wasn't demanding rings or promises. She was offering something simple. Connection without conditions. And for the first time, Kirt wanted to take it. Chapter 9. Eve's confession. Eve stood outside Kirt's apartment building, clutching her umbrella like it could shield her from more than rain. Her heart thudded against her ribs, loud and insistent. She'd rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times, but now that she was here, every word felt wrong. She almost turned back. Almost. But then she remembered his face at the coffee shop. Calm, distant, untouchable, and something inside her snapped. She couldn't let that be the last chapter of their story. She climbed the stairs, knocked softly, and waited. When the door opened, Kirt stood there in jeans and a gray t-shirt, looking tired but composed. His expression didn't change when he saw her. "Eve," he said, voice flat. "What now?" She swallowed hard. "Can I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. She walked in, the familiar scent of his apartment hitting her like a memory she didn't want to feel. It was neat, almost sterile, no trace of the man she used to know except for the quiet hum of order. Kirt leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Say what you came to say." Eve took a breath, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving. For not understanding what you were going through." "You said that before," he replied, calm as ever. "I know," she said quickly. "But I need you to hear me. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you." His jaw tightened. "You left because you felt neglected." "Yes," she whispered. "And I was wrong. I thought freedom would make me happy. It didn't. It just made me realize what I lost." Kurt's eyes were steady, unreadable. "And now what? You want to pick up where we left off?" "No," she said, shaking her head. I want a chance to make things right." He laughed softly, without humor. "Eve, there's no making it right. You wanted out. You got out." Her throat burned. "I know, but I didn't know what it cost you. I didn't know about the loans, the bills, any of it." "That's because I didn't tell you," he said evenly. "You wanted a clean break. I gave you one." Tears blurred her vision. "I thought you didn't care." "I cared," he said, his voice low. "I just didn't beg." Silence stretched, heavy and raw. Eve stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I still love you, Kirt." He didn't flinch, didn't soften. "That's not enough." Her breath hitched. "So that's it." "That's it," he said. She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Okay," she whispered. "I guess I deserve that." She turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "you were the best thing in my life." Kurt's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Goodbye, Eve." And then she was gone. Outside. The rain had stopped, but Eve felt drenched anyway, soaked in regret, heavy with the weight of words that couldn't change anything. She walked to her car, her heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks in a sentence she wished she could rewrite. She slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard through a blur of tears. Her phone buzzed. "Marcy. Marcy, well? Did you talk to him?" Eve stared at the screen, then typed. "Eve, I told him everything." He said no. 3 dots danced. Then, "Marcy, I'm sorry, Evie. Want me to come over?" Eve closed her eyes, heart aching. She typed. "Eve, not tonight. I just need to think." She tossed the phone aside and started the engine. The city lights blurred past as she drove, her mind replaying every moment. The way Kurt's voice didn't waver, the calm finality in his eyes. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was done. And that hurt more than anything. Back in her apartment, Eve curled up on the couch, knees to her chest. She thought about the years they'd shared, The quiet mornings, the laughter over burnt toast, the way he used to kiss her forehead when she fell asleep on the couch. She thought about the night she walked away, convinced she was chasing happiness. She found it, briefly. Parties, freedom, the thrill of being single. But it faded fast, leaving nothing but silence and bills and a hollow ache she couldn't name. She whispered to the empty room, "You were the best thing in my life." And for the first time, she let herself cry. Chapter 10. The Big Scare. Kurt's phone buzzed at 6:03 a.m., dragging him out of the rare luxury of a full night's sleep. He reached for it, expecting a routine email. Instead, the subject line hit him like a punch. Urgent. Contract breach. Client threatening legal action. He sat up, heart pounding. This wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. The client in question wasn't small. Losing them would mean losing half his quarterly revenue. And if they sued? He didn't even want to think about it. Kurt swung his legs out of bed, grabbed his laptop, and started typing before the coffee even brewed. Emails flew, calls were scheduled, damage control initiated. By 7:30, his apartment looked like a war room. Papers scattered, phone glued to his ear, stress clawing at his chest. By noon, he was running on fumes. The client was furious, threatening to pull the deal unless Kurt fixed the issue by end of day. He barely noticed the knock at his door until it came again, louder this time. "Kurt." Lila's voice floated through the wood, warm and concerned. "You alive in there?" He cursed under his breath. He'd forgotten their lunch. Completely. He opened the door, and there she was, bright, smiling, holding two takeout bags like a peace offering. "You look like you wrestled a bear," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "And lost." "Work," he said, voice clipped. "Big problem." "Define big," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "Big enough to tank my business," he said, rubbing his temples. "I can't talk right now." Lila studied him for a moment, then said softly, "You could have texted." "I didn't have time," he said, sharper than he meant. "I'm sorry." Her brows lifted. "You didn't have time to type 8 words?" Kurt exhaled, guilt pricking at him. "I should have." "You're right." She nodded, her expression calm but unreadable. "So, do you want me to leave?" He hesitated. Every instinct screamed yes. He needed focus, control, zero distractions. But when he looked at her, standing there with takeout and patience he didn't deserve, something inside him cracked. "No," he said quietly. "Stay? Just let me finish this call." She smiled faintly. "Deal." For the next hour, Kurt worked like a man possessed, firing off emails, negotiating terms, patching holes in a sinking ship. And through it all, Lila sat on the couch, scrolling her phone, occasionally glancing up with a look that wasn't judgment. It was understanding. When he finally closed his laptop, the clock read 3:17. He felt wrung out, hollow, but the crisis was contained. Barely. He turned to Lila, expecting annoyance. Instead, she handed him a container of noodles and said, "Eat. You look like you're about to pass out." He stared at her, something tight in his chest loosening. "You didn't have to stay." "I know," she said simply. "But you needed someone to." He swallowed hard, the weight of her words hitting deeper than he expected. "Most people don't stick around when I get like this." "Most people aren't me," she said, smiling. "And for the record, I don't need all your time, Kurt. Just the best parts of it." He stared at her, stunned into silence. No demands. No ultimatums. Just grace. And for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe chaos wasn't the enemy. Maybe it was the thing that made life worth living. Later, after Lila left, Kurt sat on the couch, staring at the empty takeout containers. He thought about her words, the best parts of you. He'd spent years guarding himself, convinced that love meant losing everything. But maybe it didn't have to. Maybe it could mean sharing pieces of himself without surrendering the whole fortress. He wasn't ready for forever, but he was ready for now. Chapter 11. The choice. Kurt didn't usually feel nervous. He thrived on control, on predictability. But tonight, sitting across from Lila in a quiet booth at a late-night diner, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: uncertainty. The diner was nearly empty, save for a couple of college kids hunched over pancakes and a waitress refilling coffee like it was oxygen. Neon lights flickered against the rain-streaked windows, casting everything in a soft glow that made the world feel smaller, safer. But Kurt's chest was tight, his thoughts tangled. Lila stirred her coffee slowly, watching him with eyes that seemed to see straight through his defenses. "You've been quiet," she said softly. "Thinking about work?" "Always," he admitted, managing a faint smile. "But not just work." "Oh." Her tone was light, but her gaze was steady. "What else?" Kurt hesitated, then said, "You." Her brows lifted, surprise flickering across her face before settling into a smile. "Well, that's flattering. And a little terrifying." He chuckled under his breath. "Terrifying for me too." She leaned in, resting her chin on her hand. "So tell me, Mr. Boundaries, what's going on in that head of yours?" He exhaled slowly, fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I like you, Lila. More than I expected to. But I'm cautious." "Because of her?" Lila asked gently. Kurt didn't pretend not to understand. "Partly. And partly because I've seen what happens when you gamble on forever. It's not just heartbreak. It's financial ruin, legal chaos. I can't go through that again." Lila nodded, her expression calm. "Fair. But here's the thing. I'm not asking for forever. I'm asking for now." He looked at her, startled. "Now?" "Yeah," she said, smiling. "Dinner." movies, laughing at bad karaoke, sharing the best parts of life without turning it into a contract negotiation. Kirt laughed, really laughed, and shook his head. You make it sound simple. It is, she said. You're the one making it complicated. He stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't demanding. She wasn't pushing for rings or promises. She was offering something he hadn't realized he missed, connection without conditions. What if I screw it up? He asked quietly. Lila grinned. Then we laugh about it and order dessert. He smiled, the tension in his chest easing for the first time in years. You really don't need all my time. Nope, she said, sipping her coffee. Just the best parts of it. Kirt sat back, letting that settle. The best parts. He could do that. He wanted to do that. Okay, he said finally, his voice steady. You've got them. Lila's smile widened, bright and warm. Good, because I already picked the dessert. He laughed again, and this time, it didn't feel dangerous. It felt like freedom. The waitress appeared with a slice of pie big enough to qualify as a structural hazard. Lila grinned and slid it toward him. Apple. Classic. No chaos. Kirt raised a brow. You're mocking me. Absolutely, she said, grabbing 2 forks. Eat. He took a bite, and for a moment, everything else, deadlines, contracts, ghosts of the past, faded into the background. It was just pie and laughter and a woman who made him feel like maybe unpredictability wasn't a threat. Maybe it was a gift. You know, Lila said, leaning back. You're not as scary as you think. Scary, he echoed. Yeah, she said, smiling. All that brooding and boundary talk. You sound like a fortress. But inside, you're just a guy who likes pie. Kirt chuckled, shaking his head. You're chaos. And you like it, she said, eyes dancing. He didn't deny it. Later, as he walked Lila to her car, Kirt felt something shift inside him. He wasn't ready for forever. He wasn't ready for rings or vows or anything that smelled like legal paperwork. But he was ready for this. Moments that mattered, laughter that felt like oxygen, and someone who didn't ask for everything, just the best parts. For the first time in years, Kirt Preston wasn't thinking about what he could lose. He was thinking about what he could keep. Chapter 12. No second chances? The diner's neon sign flickered against the night sky as Kirt walked Lila to her car. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and something else, possibility. He wasn't used to this feeling. It was light, almost reckless, like stepping off a ledge and trusting the ground would be there. Lila unlocked her door, then turned to him with that smile, the one that made rules feel like suggestions. So, she said, leaning against the car, was that so hard? Kirt smirked. Harder than a quarterly audit. Romantic, she teased. Next time, try harder than saying goodbye to my favorite pen. He chuckled, shaking his head. You're impossible. And yet, she said, eyes sparkling, you're still here. He didn't argue. He just looked at her, really looked, and felt something shift inside him. For years, he'd lived like a man bracing for impact, guarded, calculating, terrified of chaos. But tonight, chaos didn't feel like a threat. It felt like caramel and laughter and someone who didn't need all his time, just the best parts. Dinner again? He asked, surprising himself. Only if you promise dessert, she said, grinning. Deal, he said, and meant it. 2 weeks later, Kirt found himself in a karaoke bar at midnight, holding a microphone and wondering how his life had come to this. Lila was beside him, laughing so hard she could barely breathe, and the crowd was cheering for a duet neither of them could sing. This is chaos, he muttered as the music started. This is life, she whispered back, and for once, he didn't disagree. They butchered the song spectacularly, earning applause that felt more like sympathy than praise. When they collapsed into their booth afterward, Kirt was grinning like an idiot. You're terrible, Lila said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. You dared me, he shot back. And you said yes, she said, smirking. Progress. He shook his head, still smiling. You're going to ruin my reputation. What reputation? She teased. Spreadsheet king. Exactly, he said deadpan. I have standards. Not anymore, she said, raising her glass. To chaos. He clinked his glass against hers. To boundaries. They laughed, and for the first time in years, Kirt felt something he thought he'd lost, joy without fear. Across town, Eve sat in a quiet cafe, scrolling through job listings and sipping tea. She'd stopped texting Kirt after that night. Stopped hoping. It hurt, but it was clean, like closing a door and locking it for good. She smiled faintly, thinking of him. He deserved happiness. Maybe she did too. Someday. She closed her laptop, stood, and walked out into the rain, lighter than she'd felt in years. Back at the karaoke bar, Kirt handed the mic to Lila and laughed until his ribs ached. He wasn't thinking about failure rates or legal risks or the ghosts of what-ifs. He was thinking about now, about the best parts of life, the ones he'd almost forgotten existed. Later, as they walked out into the cool night air, Lila slipped her hand into his. It was a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. Kirt didn't pull away. He didn't overthink. He just held on. Still afraid of chaos? She asked softly. He looked at her, smiling. Not anymore. And for the first time in a long time, Kirt Preston wasn't afraid of second chances. Not the kind that came with contracts and vows, but the kind that came with laughter, late-night pie, and someone who understood that love didn't have to mean losing yourself.